back, everyone. We're going to be doing a shorter episode today since it's Labor Day, but I wanted to go into two main things today. One is talking about the issue of U.S. debt, because everyone says China owns our debt. Is that really true? Not really. Stick around, I'll be explaining this. Also, we hear about all these different motives and different operations of the Chinese Communist Party, subversion, economic theft, and so on. But what's really behind it? I wanted to do a more in-depth look at the ideology that directs what the Chinese Communist Party is doing, so stick around for that as well. That said, let's jump into it. The U.S. gross national debt over the last 12 months has grown to $26.5 trillion. Financial publication Wall Street notes this is an increase of about $4.45 trillion over that time period, and this raises an important question. It notes that with this $4.45 trillion in new debt, quote, these are all Treasury securities and someone had to buy them, every single one of them. But who? It notes that Japan and China are the two largest foreign creditors of the United States, accounting for about 8.8% of U.S. debt between them. Japan holds around $1.26 trillion in U.S. debt, and China holds around $1.07 trillion. It notes as well that China appears to have cut its U.S. holdings by around $9 billion over the recent months, so it was not China that bought up these securities. U.S. commercial banks, which hold about 4% of U.S. debt, meanwhile added about $1.07 trillion. And other U.S. entities, including big corporations, private equity firms, and hedge funds that hold around 31% of U.S. debt, added around $1.6 trillion. The report also notes that over the last 12 months, the Federal Reserve, which prints our money, added about $2.1 trillion in treasuries to its holdings. Now, what does this mean? While the growing U.S. debt is an issue, this blows another hole in the narrative that China could leverage U.S. debt as a weapon. It also puts into perspective the real weight of China's holdings of about $1.07 trillion in U.S. debt. Now, if China were to sell this debt very quickly, very likely, others would very quickly buy it. It would not really harm the United States, and the CCP very likely knows that. They sold a little bit of this, about $9 billion. And as we mentioned previously on this show, the Chinese regime owes the United States more money in debt than we owe them. Only with China, they have not paid us a single penny on that. The United States, in a blink of an eye, right away, if it wanted to, could say that China has to be held to that debt, and it could wipe out the debt that we owe to them immediately. The United States has not yet done that, however. Now, in other news, we've been hearing a lot about Xi's coming purge among CCP members and about the regime's strong-arm tactics in diplomacy, also about his various programs to subvert the West. But what we hear a lot less about is the actual goals of these systems. In its 2020 report to Congress on military and security developments in China, the U.S. Pentagon outlined the national strategy of the CCP, which gives some insights into these different things. It describes the regime's plans of hiding its true agendas while quietly building capabilities and strengths. It also shows its views on the United States as its main strategic competitor, and also its goals to build China into a powerful country dictated by socialism. And the ideological angle of this is actually a big part. The report says the CCP's strategy is to push for what it calls, quote, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, or what party leader Xi Jinping calls, quote, the Chinese dream. This is to make the Chinese regime a leader on the world stage. In the CCP's propaganda, it latches the identity and the objectives of the CCP with that of China and the Chinese people overall. And so its statement of the Chinese dream in this context means the dream of the Communist Party. And according to the report, the regime's national ambitions and statecraft can't be characterized accurately without considering first the communist political system that is, quote, underpinned by the party's theory of socialism with Chinese characteristics and the party itself as the essential feature. The objective of the CCP strategy is what the party calls its, quote, basic line. This is embodied in a single sentence of the party's constitution and serves as the mission of the CCP. It also works as a cornerstone in its different policies. Now, this line, which was last amended in 2017, states that China is in the, quote, primary stage of socialism. And it says the CCP aims to use the, quote, 4 cardinal principles, which I'll be explaining, to turn China into a, quote, great modern socialist country. These 4 cardinal principles that it refers to were first stated by former CCP leader Deng Xiaoping. These are to, quote, keep to the path of socialism, to uphold the people's democratic dictatorship, to uphold the leadership of the CCP, and to uphold Marxist, Leninist, and Mao Zedong thought. These are principles to ensure the party sticks to a hardline communist system. And so this hardline communist system is the element that directs everything that it does based on this. According to the Pentagon, CCP leaders believe that China is still in a weak and divided state, and so they push for what they call full reunification. This is something necessary, they believe, to accomplish by the end of 2049. And this means, in their lexicon, the regime aims to bring Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau under complete CCP rule. The party also has agendas outside of China's borders, and what it describes as a requirement for the CCP to, quote, lead the reform of the global governance system. What does that mean? Lead the reform of the global governance system. That means changing world governments in line with the CCP's thought. Now, as this report notes, the CCP views the current system of international politics as, quote, antithetical to their socialist system and an intolerable constraint on their strategic ends. It also notes that in its goals, the CCP internally has a hardline socialist stance, which its leaders believe the country can't break away from. It notes a statement from Xi Jinping to the CCP Central Committee back in 2013, where he stated his stance that, quote, only socialism can save China, and only socialism with Chinese characteristics can develop China. And so even internal development, all of this again goes back to ideology. Socialism is the main point they have. Socialism is the main thing that directs what they do. The Pentagon report notes, quote, from the party's perspective, its leadership and systems are uniquely able to restore China's strength, prosperity, and prestige, underscored with the implicit warning that any deviation from socialism's path would result in chaos in China, falling behind on its historic mission. And despite claims from the international community that by engaging in the free market, the CCP has somehow abandoned socialism, the report notes that CCP leaders, quote, flatly reject the notion that the party has abandoned its socialist ideology in recent decades. It notes that the CCP asserts they're on the path of, quote, socialist modernization, but are taking steps to avoid Mao-era catastrophes that came from pushing its agendas too quickly. It notes a speech from Xi Jinping to party cadres back in 2014 where he said that, quote, promoting the modernization of the national governance system and capacity is definitely not westernization or capitalism. Again, in China, they have these big corporations. Almost all of them are state-run companies. Any of the mid to high-level companies are either directly state-run or are deeply controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And the CCP views itself as being in heated competition with capitalist systems abroad. They still view it from this standpoint. It views international competition between its own state-run companies and foreign independent companies as part of the broader battle of the global systems and what it calls, quote, the China model of government, and also the deeper battle of the communist system, this China model again, and the open U.S. model of government. They regard this, the CCP, as one of its main battlegrounds for international dominance. Again, the U.S. model versus the China model. And note a statement from Xi Jinping, who said, quote, system advantages are the greatest advantages of a country, referring to the system of government. And he added, quote, and the competition of different systems is the most fundamental competition between countries. Again, they see the U.S. model, the U.S. order, right, Pax Americana, as being the main impediment to the rise of China. Now, as the Pentagon report notes, quote, the CCP's leadership has long viewed China as embroiled in a major international strategic competition with other states. And in this competition, it states that party leaders still view international competition through the lens of the Cold War. Many of them remember the fall of the Soviet Union. Many of them were around before that. And with the belief on their end that their own socialist system was and will remain the regime's underlying source of tension with the West, mainly the United States. Now, in this light, the CCP aims to conceal its true agendas from the international community and to not openly display the depths of its hostilities to the West. This follows the strategy of former CCP leader Deng Xiaoping, who gave orders to, quote, hide our capacities and bide our time, preserve ourselves, and develop gradually. Although on this note, Xi Jinping has been accused by other party leaders of deviating too hard from Deng Xiaoping's vision of this, the illusion of the peaceful rise. And they say that his abandonment of this, his pushing too hard, has drawn counterattacks from the West, which is the context of some of the recent developments we've seen in China. But at the same time, the CCP's leaders believe the West is in relative decline. And in light of this, they believe in a narrative of China's rise. The Pentagon report notes that despite the fact that, quote, China is benefiting enormously from the general peace and prosperity of the current international system, the party views the current global system as being incompatible with its own, and its doctrines and goals as well. It aims instead to change the international system in accordance with its own model. The Chinese Communist Party, just like the Soviet Union, is pushing for this global revolution. Only under the CCP, they're doing it under the label of the China model. Now, that said, folks, we're again broadcasting 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Also, if you want to support us, please don't forget, please join us on Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Also, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel grow. Also, if you want to go the extra mile, as always, please tell a friend or a family member about Crossroads. Now, with that said, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, and stay free.